Mayday. Both engines stopped. No control. No radar. Over the dead zone, empty ocean below for thousands of miles. No help nearby. Then, from seat 7B, a calm voice picked up the radio. Falcon-9, requesting landing. Not a pilot. A passenger. What she said next changed everything. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The morning was ordinary at Auckland International Airport. The sky was clear, the wind was light, and Pacific Wings Flight 214 was getting ready for a long journey to Fiji and then onward to Honolulu. It was a Boeing 787, a big and modern plane, carrying 263 passengers and 12 crew members. Nobody on that plane knew that in a few hours, they would be part of a story that would be remembered for years. Captain Elena Cruz was in command that day. She was 50 years old, and she had been flying for 26 years. She had flown this same route more times than she could count. Beside her sat First Officer Daniel Osei, a younger pilot with 8 years of experience. He was calm, careful, and always double-checked every step before moving forward. Together, they made a strong and trusted team. In the cabin, passengers were settling into their seats. Some were sleeping, some were reading, and some were watching the safety video without really paying attention. In seat 7B, near the window, sat a woman named Priya Anand. She looked like any other passenger, dressed simply, carrying a small laptop bag. But Priya was not an ordinary traveler. She had spent 15 years working as an aircraft systems engineer, and for the last 5 years, she had worked closely with airlines to study engine failures and emergency procedures. She was flying that day for a personal reason, to visit her sister in Fiji, not for work. She had no idea that her knowledge would soon be needed in the sky. The plane took off at 8:15 in the morning. The climb was smooth, and the cabin crew began serving breakfast. Passengers looked out of their windows as the coastline of New Zealand slowly disappeared behind them, replaced by the endless blue of the Pacific Ocean. This part of the world was known among pilots as the Dead Zone. It was a huge stretch of ocean, more than 2,000 kilometers wide, where there was very little radar coverage. If something went wrong here, help would take a long time to arrive, and there were very few places to land safely. For the first 3 hours, everything was calm. The plane cruised at 37,000 feet, moving steadily through clear skies. Then, without warning, something changed. A soft warning light appeared on the cockpit panel. First Officer Osei noticed it first and pointed it out to Captain Cruz. It showed unusual readings from the left engine. At first, it did not seem serious. The pilots followed their checklist calmly, checking each system one by one. But within minutes, the readings grew worse. The left engine began to lose power rapidly. Captain Cruz reduced the throttle, hoping to stabilize it, but the engine kept losing strength until it shut down completely. The plane shook slightly, and a low humming sound replaced the steady engine noise that passengers had grown used to. Many people did not notice right away, but some felt the change in their bodies before their minds understood what was happening. Then, only a few minutes later, warning alarms rang out again. This time, it was the right engine. The pilots tried every restart procedure they knew, but the second engine also failed. In an instant, the cabin fell into a strange and heavy silence. Both engines had stopped. The plane, once powered by 2 enormous jet engines, was now gliding silently through the sky, thousands of feet above the empty ocean. For a few seconds, even the flight controls felt heavy and slow. With both engines gone, the normal hydraulic power that moved the wings and tail dropped sharply, and the plane briefly refused to answer the pilot's hands the way it should. Captain Cruz pulled gently on the controls and felt almost no response. "I don't have control," she said quietly to First Officer Osei, her eyes fixed on the instruments. Then the small emergency device under the plane spun into the wind and began feeding backup power into the system, and slowly, control returned to her hands. It was only a few seconds, but those seconds felt endless. Inside the cockpit, Captain Cruz's voice remained steady as she pressed the radio switch. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Pacific Wings 214. We have lost both engines. We are gliding. We had no control for a moment. Requesting immediate assistance. Her voice was calm, but every word carried the weight of the danger they were facing. The radio operator on the other end, thousands of kilometers away, understood immediately how serious the situation was. In the cabin, First Officer Osei made an announcement, asking passengers to remain seated and to follow the safety instructions of the crew. The flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced calm, even though many of them were frightened inside. Passengers gripped their armrests. Some prayed quietly. Children looked at their parents' faces, searching for reassurance. In seat 7B, Priya Anand sat very still, her mind working quickly. She understood exactly what a dual-engine failure meant. She knew about glide ratios, about how far a plane like this could travel without engines, and about the auxiliary systems that would keep some power running even without the main engines. She looked out of the window and saw nothing but ocean in every direction. She thought about the winds, about the distance to the nearest airport, and about how much time they truly had. She unbuckled her seatbelt and walked calmly toward the front of the plane. A flight attendant tried to stop her, telling her to return to her seat immediately. Priya spoke quietly but firmly, explaining that she was an aircraft systems engineer and that she might be able to help the pilots with important information. The flight attendant hesitated for only a moment before deciding to knock on the cockpit door. Captain Cruz, hearing the situation outside, made a quick decision. She allowed Priya to enter the cockpit. Every second mattered, and there was no time for long explanations. Priya introduced herself quickly and explained her background. The captain listened carefully, weighing the situation. She had a first officer beside her who was highly capable, but any extra knowledge in that moment could make the difference between survival and disaster. Priya looked at the instruments and quickly understood the situation. The plane was gliding at a steady rate, losing altitude slowly but surely. She began to calculate, in her head, how far the aircraft could travel before it would need to land. She also looked at the wind information on the display. The wind was blowing from the northwest at a good speed. If the plane turned slightly to use that wind as a tailwind, it could extend its gliding distance by many extra kilometers. She shared her calculations with Captain Cruz, speaking clearly and without wasting words. The captain listened, checked the numbers herself, and agreed with the plan. She turned to First Officer Osei and gave the new heading, adjusting their direction to take advantage of the wind. The change was small, only a few degrees, but it could mean the difference between reaching land safely and running out of altitude over open water. As the plane continued its silent glide, the crew worked through emergency checklists, trying different methods to restart at least one engine. The auxiliary power unit kept the electrical systems and instruments working, and a small emergency device deployed from the underside of the plane, spinning in the wind to provide backup power for the controls. This kept the pilots able to steer the aircraft safely, even without engine power. Down in the cabin, passengers felt the aircraft continue its slow, quiet descent. Flight attendants moved carefully, offering calm words and clear instructions. They did not know the full details of what was happening in the cockpit, but they trusted their training and continued to do their jobs with steady hands and steady voices. Some passengers held hands with strangers sitting beside them. Others closed their eyes and breathed slowly, trying to stay calm. In the cockpit, the altitude kept dropping. 28,000 feet. 25,000. 22,000. Priya suggested trying a fuel cross-feed procedure, a way of feeding fuel from a different tank into one of the engines, in case the earlier failure had been caused by a fuel problem rather than a mechanical one. Captain Cruz agreed to try it. First Officer Osei carefully worked through the steps, opening the cross-feed valve and initiating another restart attempt on the right engine. For a few seconds, nothing happened. The cockpit was silent except for the sound of wind rushing past the aircraft. Then, slowly, a new sound began to grow. A soft hum, followed by a deeper vibration, and then the unmistakable roar of an engine coming back to life. The right engine had restarted. Captain Cruz gently increased power, watching the engine readings carefully to make sure it would hold steady. It did. With one engine now working, the situation became much safer. The plane was no longer a silent glider but a powered aircraft again, even if only with a single engine. Captain Cruz informed air traffic control of their improved condition and requested guidance to the nearest suitable airport. Because of the new heading Priya had suggested earlier, using the tailwind, the aircraft was now within reach of a small international airport on a Pacific island, much closer than their original destination. Captain Cruz was busy with both hands on the controls, working with First Officer Osei to keep the aircraft stable on one engine. She looked at Priya and gave a short nod toward the radio. "Talk to the tower for us," she said. "Tell them our status." Priya picked up the handset. She paused for only a moment, then pressed the switch and spoke in a calm, clear voice. "Tower, this is Falcon-9, requesting landing. 263 souls on board, one engine operating, requesting priority clearance and emergency services on standby." The controller on the ground answered immediately. "Falcon-9, copy that. Runway is clear. You are cleared to land. Emergency crews are in position." From that moment, the call sign Falcon-9 stayed with the flight for the rest of the emergency, spoken by a passenger from seat 7B who had never planned to be the one requesting the landing, yet was exactly the person who did. The controllers on the ground prepared for the emergency landing. Fire trucks and ambulances were positioned along the runway. Air traffic was cleared to give Flight 214 a straight and unobstructed path. Captain Cruz began preparing for a single-engine landing, a difficult task that required constant attention to keep the aircraft balanced and aligned with the runway. In the cabin, the flight attendants made an announcement explaining that the crew was working to land safely and asked everyone to follow the brace position instructions when the time came. Passengers held on to their seats, hearts pounding, watching the ocean slowly turn into green hills and a small coastline as the island came into view. The final approach was tense. With only one engine providing power, the aircraft needed careful corrections to stay straight. Captain Cruz handled the controls smoothly, making small adjustments as the runway grew closer. The wheels touched the ground firmly but safely, and the aircraft began to slow down along the runway, surrounded by emergency vehicles with their lights flashing. As the plane came to a stop, a wave of relief spread through the cabin. Some passengers cried, others clapped, and many simply sat still, breathing deeply, trying to understand that they were finally safe. The ordeal, which had felt like it lasted forever, had actually taken less than 30 minutes from the first warning light to the final landing. Emergency teams boarded the aircraft to check on everyone. Most passengers were shaken but unharmed. A few needed medical attention for high blood pressure or anxiety, but there were no serious injuries. Slowly, everyone was guided off the plane and onto the tarmac, where they stood together under the warm island sky, grateful to be standing on solid ground. Later that day, investigators arrived to begin looking into what had caused both engines to fail. Early findings suggested a fuel contamination issue, something that had gone unnoticed during earlier maintenance checks. The airline immediately grounded similar aircraft for inspection and began a full review of its fuel quality procedures, determined to make sure such a dangerous situation could never happen again. Captain Cruz spoke to investigators about the events of the flight, praising her crew for their professionalism and calm behavior throughout the emergency. She also mentioned the passenger who had come forward with important technical knowledge, someone whose quick thinking and clear calculations had helped guide the aircraft to safety. She did not know much about this passenger beyond her name and her background, but she was deeply thankful for her presence that day. Priya Anand quietly gave her statement to the investigation team as well, explaining the technical details of the engine failure, the wind calculations, and the crossfeed procedure. She answered every question clearly and honestly, then quietly made her way through the small airport terminal, blending into the crowd of relieved passengers. She did not seek attention or recognition. She simply wanted to continue her journey to see her sister, carrying with her the memory of a flight she would never forget. In the months that followed, the airline introduced new fuel testing procedures across its entire fleet, inspired directly by what had happened on Flight 214. Ground crews were given clearer instructions on reporting any unusual signs during refueling, no matter how small they seemed. The changes were quiet but important, the kind of safety improvements that most passengers would never notice, but that would protect countless people on future flights. The story of Flight 214 became known within aviation circles as an example of how calm leadership, careful teamwork, and unexpected help from a stranger could turn a terrifying emergency into a story of survival. The call sign Falcon-9 was remembered by everyone who heard that recording, not because it was unusual, but because of the calm, steady voice that spoke it from Seat 7B when the tower needed an answer most. Passengers who were on that flight went back to their normal lives, carrying with them a deep appreciation for the small, ordinary moments they had once taken for granted. Many of them never learned the full details of what had happened in the cockpit, only that their pilots and crew had done everything right, and that somehow, against difficult odds, they had all come home safely. For Captain Elena Cruz, First Officer Daniel Osei, and the passenger in Seat 7B, that day over the dead zone remained a memory they would carry for the rest of their lives, reminder of how quickly ordinary skies could turn dangerous, and how quickly courage, knowledge, and calm thinking could bring everyone safely back down to the ground.